Good morning. This is Chapter 28, Lecture A. This is the last week of lectures. We've got about 2 or 3 left. I'll lecture a little bit the next couple days. If you go onto the classroom, your study guide is posted. The test will be probably the end of next week or that beginning Monday or Tuesday. So between the 3rd and 7th. I know some of your dual credit kids will be getting out that are seniors before too long. So we'll make sure we get you your test in before too long. Due to the winter and everything, we had to push stuff back a few days. So we'll look at I can't remember, I readjusted the final timeline. I'll look at it. But the study guide is up there. At the earliest, the test would be next Friday. Okay. Also, if you have not did Chapter 27 quizzes, please get those done by today. Chapter 28 quizzes will be posted this week as well. I'll probably skip reaction quizzes for now because of the timing and everything, but we'll focus on the actual quiz. A new century and a new crisis. There's a lot of things here. Focus questions: what were the major policy elements of the war and terror in the wake of September 11th? How did the war in Iraq unfold in the wake of 9/11? How did the war and terror affect the economy and American liberties? What events eroded support for Bush's policies during his second term? What kinds of change did voters hope for when they elected Barack Obama? And what were the major challenges of Obama's first term? And what were the prevailing ideas of American freedom at the beginning of the 21st century? The war on terror. Bush before September 11th. He persuaded Congress to enact the largest tax cut at that point in American history. The biggest was now Trump's tax cut. Foreign policy: Bush emphasized American freedom of action. He announced he would not abide by the Kyoto Protocol sought to combat global warming, which was very strict regulation guidelines, and then infuriated much of the world and environmentalists by this. He is a conservative, but he's a moderate on some levels. But his big thing that he is going to do is the tax cut. The other thing that he will announce early in his presidency before 9/11 was No Child Left Behind. If you're in education or anything about it, that's a standardized test trying to increase state test scores dramatically. A noble idea, probably poorly guided, is the best way to describe what No Child Left Behind was.
What year was that?
Like 2001. Right after he took office, he announced that his wife was a teacher/librarian, and so he was one of the first Republican presidents ever to really tackle anything education. However, his presidency will not be defined by the Kyoto Protocol, the tax cuts, or anything else. It'll be defined by one event, and that's September 11th. They hate freedom. 9/11 transformed the international situation, domestic political environment. Popular patriotism followed. President's popularity will soar after this. Made freedom the rallying cry. Why did these terrorist attacks the United States? The president repeatedly asked. His answer: because they love freedom, that's why, and they hate freedom. Essentially, 9/11 will be associated with they hate freedom, they hate our way of life, and that becomes associated there on out. Now, just as a little bit of more understanding of 9/11, it was a very complex plot planned by the Al-Qaeda organization with 15 different terrorists partaking in hijacking of 4 planes. There was a 5th plane planned, if you read through the 9/11 Commission report, which I'm pretty sure none of you will, but I did on a leisure reading. It was very interesting to read that they were actually tracking some of these groups, but they didn't enact on them. And this goes all the way back to the Clinton presidency. It cannot be solely put on the Bush presidency for the lack of failure of tracking these terrorists. It's a kind of a double-edged failure. And not saying that either one failed, as much more as they missed the warning signs. Now, after 9/11, the Bush Doctrine, going to the next slide here, the War on Terror 2. War on Terror, vaguely defined enemy. So, who's the enemy? Well, anyone that's against the United States and supports terrorist groups. So it's very loosely defined. This new war would recognize no middle ground. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. Bush demanded that Afghanistan, ruled by the Taliban, surrender Osama bin Laden, the 9/11 planner, which they did not abide by. The Taliban, who is a radical Islamic group, controlled Afghanistan since the mid-90s. After the Soviets pulled out, there was turmoil in Afghanistan, and the Taliban will emerge as this radical group that took control. We really didn't pay too much attention to Afghanistan in the 90s. But when Al Qaeda does this 9/11, they trained in Afghanistan before they came to the United States. So obviously, they have a direct connection to 9/11. And October 7th, 2001, we will launch the war in Afghanistan. It is the longest war in American history. We are still there, 18 years later. It's incredible how long we've been there. We are working to reduce our footprint there and pull out, but the problem is the Taliban are still enduring and out, so does Al Qaeda. But our initial support there was massive support to go into Afghanistan. The UN went in, and we've since tried to stabilize Afghanistan and other things. Now moving on to the axis of evil. In the State of the Union fall in 9/11, he accused Iraq, Iran, and North Korea of harboring terrorists and developing weapons of mass destruction. These weapons of mass destruction were chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, and anything and above that could be considered mass killers. Call these three countries the axis of evil. North Korea, for the most part, has fallen into line, though they have developed nuclear weapons. They have been heavily sanctioned and they've been struggling economically. Then you have Iran, who's been constantly an issue for the United States. They are a much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Radical Islamic group or country in the Middle East. And then Iraq, well, if you know anything about history, we know Iraq becomes center point of a lot of things. Yes?
What were the other countries doing? Like, why didn't Russia help us, or like Britain or any of that?
All countries helped us with Afghanistan. The UN itself was very supportive of Afghanistan. When it came to Iraq, the only country that really supported us, besides a few small countries, was England, or the Great Britain. And that came at the personal expense of Tony Blair, who was the former Prime Minister of England, who was forced to resign in the mid-2000s. He was a close friend of Bush. The British did go in with us, but we'll get some more on the war in Iraq here in a second. An American empire. America's response sent shockwaves. At first, sympathy swept the world and most supported the war in Afghanistan. Many feared a building of an American empire, though by it, our retribution in Afghanistan was swift, and we were furious. We came in there with very precise precision. Obviously, now the war is prolonged because of rooting out complete terrorist groups. Unlike a country, it's very difficult because they can blend in, hide. They have no affiliation technically to one country. They can blend into others. Now, confronting Iraq. Several key conservative leaders wanted to oust Saddam from power. They connected him indirectly to 9/11 just from his radicalness and all this. Secretary of State Colin Powell had objectives, saw the large task to do it. No one argued that Saddam was a bad person, but whether that we should go in and remove him with a full-scale war was the other question. In 2002, we announced the goal of regime change in Iraq, claimed he was hiding weapons of mass destruction. Next slide. Now, the Iraq War. Iraq War split the Western Alliance and inspired a massive anti-war movement throughout the world, including the United States. Traditional allies like Germany and France refused to support a preemptive strike against Iraq. Even without UN approval, we went in and attacked in March of 2000. We gave them massive warning that we were coming. Basically, Saddam Hussein, if he gave himself up, we would have avoided war. With Great Britain as its sole significant ally, within a month, we kicked the crap out of the Iraqi army. We take Baghdad and later capture Saddam Hussein hiding in a hole. Later that year, he will be executed in 2006. Bush flew onto an aircraft carrier in 2004 and had a banner that stated "Mission accomplished." Wartime president, riding high. Even after the initial Iraqi invasion, his popularity was still very high. Insurgency born and a civil war will erupt in Iraq in the late 2004 and early 2005. That's when the war will bog down. The world in the war marked a turning point in American foreign policy. Initially strong support for the war, but by 2000 had faded. One of the few times where the United States was isolated in the world. I will tell you this, just for some perspective here, I did serve in Operation Iraqi Freedom or Enduring Freedom from 2006 to 2007. I can tell you the official narrative that goes down in the textbooks or the media has reported is often missing a few of the major points. I'm not to say that we weren't misguided, but you look no farther than Syria today. The initial weapons used in Syria with the gassing of his own people by Assad, you know where those weapons came from? I'll give you one guess. They left Iraq in the mid-2000s. They won't tell you this official narrative. Bush will never come out and defend himself. He made some bad decisions. I will never deny that. But the thing that people miss is Saddam had weapons of mass destruction that he got out of the country. They went to Syria. And they were used in the Syrian Civil War 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, when the Civil War broke out in Syria. To say that he had nothing is ludicrous. I can tell you from other perspectives, they found other dirty weapons in Iraq. Do we go around advertising them? Absolutely not.
So did Saddam Hussein, he like controlled probably that whole area around?
What he did,
you're saying now?
When they knew the United States was coming,
Mm-hmm.
they got rid of all the weapons very hastily. We gave him over 3 months to plan. So as soon as we came in, anything that he had dirty, like dirty weapons, were sent out of country.
And other countries are okay with it, or he just?
They were allies to Saddam, or they were sympathetic, like Syria. Think about Syria. Assad, he's been in power for several years, very sympathetic to those causes. He has his own harsh regime. That being said, maybe a misguided war. What I'm here to tell you is there is still a lot of stuff that we do not know as people. We want to cast blame very easily. I'm not saying things couldn't have been done better. I won't ever disagree with that. The aftermath of September 11th at home. Now, Security and Liberty, U.S. Patriot Act, unprecedented powers of law enforcement agencies, primarily around surveillance. Set up a detention camp at U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay. It's not U.S. soil, so this brings into the question, is U.S. Constitution extended to those detainees there? They are not called POWs, they're called enemy combatants, which is a whole clarification to basically mean they can be treated very much severely, hence waterboarding. Bush administration authorized secret military tribunals for non-citizens. The power of the president went unchecked for many years. Various regulations and court orders of the 70s were rescinded because of the war on terror. Congress authorized some, but the president implemented many of them unilaterally and to no objection. The torture controversy. Now, where this will start to become a black eye for the Bush administration, Bush officials insisted in the aftermath of 9/11 the United States need not be bound by international law, which was fine until Abu Ghraib, a prison in Iraq. It was a former Saddam prison that the U.S. took over and made as a detention center. Military personnel carried out horrible behaviors, photographed themselves with Iraqi prisoners. This is where you have the famous Black Hood incident. Naked Iraqi soldier with a hood over his, like, dressed up like a crow, like a scarecrow. Very, very black moment on America, who were supposed to be the moral superior to the rest of the world. The economy under Bush. After this, chaos in Iraq began to undermine support for Bush's foreign policy. Economy slowed and manufacturing jobs were lost, and stuff went overseas. Now, the winds of change. We're not going to do this whole section today. We'll do a couple more. Well, we might be able to get through most of this section. The 2004 election. This is an important election because the first election I could vote in. I was 18 at the time. So this election has a special place in my heart for us because it was the first time I could actually vote and participate in elements of our republic. Bush's popularity dropped some, and not all were benefiting from the economy. John Kerry was nominated to run, first Catholic since JFK to run. John Kerry was his own. They thought he was a rival to Bush that would be good, but he had his own loose ends that the Democrats didn't foresee. Kerry was a surprisingly ineffective candidate while Bush rallied strong support in his base. Bush won a fairly narrow victory, but carried both popular and electoral wins. The thing about Kerry was he was not well liked by veterans. But, John Kerry was a Vietnam veteran. There was a fake ad that went out late in the election that kind of swayed a lot of people's opinions, though it was inaccurate. Kerry had very been contentious about his Vietnam service and older records. They obviously attacked that he was weak on terror. And Bush, wartime president, people didn't want change. They wanted to rally around. Bush really galvanized his base, which very much like Trump did in 2016, got strong support from rural communities, and then obviously carried some bigger demographics. Bush was obviously not Trump, much more appealing to a moderate sense than Trump, but he wins fairly easily. It was a narrow victory, but as far as it wasn't like a lot of suspense, right? As the election night went on, it was pretty evident that Bush was going to win. Outlined ending tyranny in the world inaugural address. Iraq was chaos and several Republican scandals then soon rocked Congress after that. Biggest thing to rock Bush early on in his second term was Katrina. August 2005, Katrina hit New Orleans. Failure at many levels at local, state, and federal level quickly became a man-made disaster. Bush will soldier the blame because he didn't respond quick enough. Mayor was slow to order evacuation, fear of damage to tourism. If anyone is due blame, it's also the mayor. You can put the blame at Bush for maybe not being as fast, but the mayor was an absolute idiot. They were worried about protecting Mardi Gras and all their tourism rather than actual safety of people. What I mean by that is they didn't want to evacuate people because they've been evacuated before and then lose all those tourism dollars. This case, if they didn't evacuate, it was like apocalyptic. I mean, this is how bad New Orleans got hit. Over 1,500 died and nearly two-thirds of the population was displaced for a very long time. Part of the Metrodome, or the Superdome, or it's called the Mercedes Dome now, but the New Orleans Dome that was there, I think it's the Superdome, was damaged by the hurricane, and like it was just a huge mess. And there's image of it across the board. Winds have changed too. We'll probably call this the last slide for today. Battle over the border, fears of terrorists crossing the border merged with older worries about undocumented immigration. Something that's carried over to this day with build the wall mentality. Between Bush and Obama increased the size of the Border War Patrol officers. Unofficial militias sprang up along the border to enforce it, and then immigration issue became a stalemate to this day. Islam America and the clash of civilization. Events of 9/11 placed new pressures on religious liberty, especially those who alienated Muslims. One argued that the new global conflict will be between Western Islamic civilizations, which some of that is true still to this day. Many Americans found it hard to separate Islam and terrorism. The Constitution and Liberty 5-4 ruling that upheld the right of college and university to take race into account in admission decisions. Lawrence versus Texas 6-3 majority declared unconstitutional a Texas law making homosexual acts a crime. One of the big things that changes during this is the legalization of basically same-sex marriage. Though that same-sex marriage doesn't come later, homosexual acts have been illegal in many states. Now, with Lawrence versus Texas, the committed homosexual act was now decriminalized, meaning you could legally be gay. That being said, not until 2014-15, with Obergefell versus Hodges, did it overturn same-sex marriage laws. Yeah, you did not know that until the early 2000s. There was many laws in the country in states that said you could not do homosexual acts.
What was the punishment for it?
That was probably a misdemeanor. I don't think it was a felony. You get fined. Now, how often were those actually enacted? Not often. Same-sex marriage law, though, was a very big one. You were denied marriage licenses in many states. The court and the president, in a series of decisions, the court reaffirmed the rule of law both for American citizens and foreigners held prisoner by the United States. But one thing that will be big is after the torture scandal hits and then Guantanamo Bay by 2006, the courts are going to rule those prisoners they have rights protected them by the Constitution. Though they are POWs, they are not citizens, they still have rights. So that's where we're going to stop for today. We've covered a lot. The early 2000s, we could go into much more detail, but obviously we're drawing near to the end. If you have questions, please let me know. Bye.